Over to you, Surinder.
Thanks, Alim. So service design packages, I mean, service design as a function is quite a vast area in terms of ITIL or the ITIL framework. So I'm going to try and touch on it in a way which encompasses most of my sentiments, having worked in the area for the best part of 7 years. So I'm not sure how many of you are actually familiar with what a service design package is. If I can get this to work, because it doesn't seem to be moving. So here is the actual definition of a service design package. It's basically a document defining all aspects of IT service and its requirements through each stage of the life cycle. In my kind of not so broad definition, it can be something which is bespoke sometimes and doesn't just encompass, for example, a template I will share with you towards the end of the slide deck. It's entirely dependent on how big or small the service is as to what it encompasses. So like I said, it's quite a vast subject or area to highlight, but the SCP is just a significant product of the service design stage. And I'll go through the stages as well as to where the SCP actually sits within, even service transition until it gets to operations. So that's just a basic definition of what a service design package is. Moving on to the actual contents of a service design package. First of all, as any service design package starts or where it kind of materializes is getting the business requirements together. And then moving on around the circle, as you can see on the slide, is getting service and applicability contacts, functional service requirements. I've had service design packages which have actually encompassed non-functional requirements as well. Again, because it's so broad, I'm just touching on functional requirements because that's what the breadth of them do in terms of delivery. Defining what your service acceptance criteria is, because that's going to differ from service to service. It's not going to be bespoke. Though having said that, to keep it clean, sometimes it is an idea to have a template which is one you can keep reusing and not start reinventing the wheel as such. So that's important as well. So it's more about thinking of what will actually happen in the service design process, as opposed to just kind of bashing out a service design package. And in this kind of wheel, what I see important is getting the main stakeholders onboarded, which I'll come on to on the next slide. Service design and topology, the service transition plan. Here we engage the service transition managers, for example, project managers, in terms of what are we actually going to deliver? What is the service acceptance criteria for this to be kind of thrown over the line to operations? Then this is where we get service operational acceptance, or develops or devise some kind of plan to get it to readiness. And once we've got it to operational readiness, that's where we're confident. Here we've got a package that's going to deliver end to end what it says. The one thing I would like to highlight is that a service design package is not a project plan. So a project plan to me is something which is quite dynamic, whereas to me a service design package is almost static, but not quite. It can be fluid, but it's not something you'd keep as a sort of a project manager would on any project within a business. So it's fluid, but it's not fluid in the sense that we have to meet these deadlines to get X, Y, and Z done. So that's basically the contents of a service design package. It's quite vast, but this is I'm just getting 8 kind of circles on that wheel just to show high level what it is. But if we drill down into those, it's quite a big chunk of work. Okay, so next we have the phases of service design. Firstly, conceptualizing that. Having conceptualized an idea, you almost become a SME in that you know, area, and you know what you're going to drill or deliver out of this. So conceptualization for me has been very important in terms of delivery, because for me, if I go to the last kind of box at the end, which translate design specifications into delivery specifications, I look at it kind of a bottom-up approach, in the sense that I need to now start engaging those stakeholders to get an idea of what it would look like in operations. So having had process experience as well, I'm going to highlight that it really helped me in terms of how I was designing templates for service design packages as well, because it's important that, you know, things are encompassed in the project, in the service design package, in terms of how I would like to see the service running, or how the stakeholders would like to see the service running, you know, smoothly. So the second box, moving on from conceptualization, identify service package components, working with the team to you know, get them onboarded onto what the service design template will look like in terms of getting the components to come together. Performance specification was a big thing when I was setting up a service catalog for quite a large government organization about 3 years ago. Understanding what, you know, their SLAs were, what SLM looked like, in terms of what kind of reports the client wanted, in order to avoid any kind of penalty points that, you know, we were going to get in terms of not delivering to the spec. So that middle bit was very important in terms of delivering a service catalog. And I say service catalog because it's one of the larger services that I've delivered on 3 projects that I've done for central government departments. And it's one that really sticks out, and it's one that's very important, because I use the analogy of a suit and a tailor. So, I mean, if I go to a tailor and ask a tailor to stitch me a suit, here we are, you know, having the suit stitched, but I don't provide any measurements for that suit. So if I'm not providing measurements, I'm not going to be sat there expecting a suit to come out and fit me. It's not, it's just logic. It's not going to happen. So it's important that the specification or the business requirements are exactly how we need them in order to deliver you know, the performance spec in the design spec, and ultimately get that into delivery, into operations. So there are quite pivotal points in the phases of service design, and to get them right, well, as right as you can, because nothing is absolutely A1, you know, it's important. And how we get that is, for me personally, it's about empathy and understanding how the user would see things once it's been delivered. And empathy has to be something which is a really important part of service design, as I see and as I go through my career. It's something that, you know, I really kind of emphasize on as well, because if there's a lack of understanding and I'm not able to listen to the client in terms of what they require or want, then I'm not going to create a service which is going to function properly. And I've seen earlier years of my career where things have fallen out over when they've got to early life support, and it's been a learning curve for myself. You know, sometimes it's having those conversations and having that understanding of where to kind of take the lead and draw these packages. So these are just the, you know, high level, again, phases of service design. Now, where does a service design package sit? So in terms of the actual life cycle, the service design package sits between service design and operations, and that's basically where my kind of remit has always stopped. So I've been involved in service strategy, but not so much in my previous role. So it was more or less kind of getting it from service design, lifting it and working with transition managers to transition the service, and eventually get it to service introduction, where it's in operations and it's live and it's doing a fantastic job. Okay, so this is basically the most important part of my my deck. I believe there are 5 steps. Again, keeping it very high level for today's session. In order to deliver a service design package which is fully functional, and something that is important, is the fact that I work in a very agile way, and I like to work in organizations which are agile. As well as agile in technologies, we have, the minimum viable product as well. I've seen where corners have been cut just to save money as well. So it's not something I like to do. Obviously, it's not something anyone would like to do, but it does happen. So I come back to the whole agile way of working in terms of delivering a service design package. Firstly, defining what's important in a service design package. It's important to get transition and operation teams to kind of have that first bond together, because that's where you establish the initial communication. Making sure that the SDP creation is mandatory, I have found is, I've put my foot down many times in businesses, organizations, and said, look, we have to do an SDP, because if we don't, X, Y, and Z will happen. So giving them a flavor of, here's how I can add value by actually creating an SCP and making that mandatory. Because in terms of ITIL best practice, in my eyes, it is mandatory. And so, going back and forth to operations and understanding what they're actually looking for as well within the business is important, as well as clients and vendors. And having SIAM transition experience, where I've been the integrator, has also lent kind of a multi-vendor approach to it, which has been challenging in itself. Having 6 or 7 vendors with 12 services to transition, and some of them overlap, is an amazing way to get experience of how service design packages can actually be streamlined as well. In some instances, teaching people how to create the service design package is also important, because a lot of people, and there's probably many people on the session today who have not had exposure to a service design package before, but I'm sure there are many that have. Getting people on board and getting people to buy into the idea, I think, is a very important part, and step forward just highlights how important it is, to create an SDP. Giving the team instructions on saying, look, this is how it works, and it's basically within our best interest as an organization to do this. But also having, the creation being mandatory, but also having in place, properly designed templates, and having the process that goes there and ensuring it comes out right is also important. Again, change management is something that I would really, really, really advocate, because it mitigates or minimizes the risk of damage, in terms of kind of having that formal change control. Because having something that has change control, you get that, you get the sight of, this is actually going to work, and where things have fallen over, or where they've moved on a bit. So having change control and change management, that point of the process, is very, very important, and I would advocate that. And not a lot of organizations look at how a service design package should actually be controlled as well. So that's very, very important in my eyes. I think that's the most important part of creating a service design package, and having that kind of admin over it, and it just cuts so much time wastage as well, going forward. And then ultimately creating an SDP template, and having that template to then distribute to your team. And that, I think, is the part where everyone's kind of understanding what is going to go on, with a service. So for example, the service catalog in my case, giving the team a high level overview of what the catalog's functionality is, for them to understand what the design package entails. That in itself, setting up workshops, or even having workflows and blueprints to do that, for them to fill out the templates or understand what the template is about, it was quite important. I mean, it's extra work sometimes, but sometimes it works to your advantage when you can deliver a template which is easy to understand. And this is my last slide, and this slide basically gives an overview as to, you know, what a basic service design package template looks like. I mean, this is probably just a front cover because it goes into a lot more detail than that. Again, service catalog would probably have SLAs actually highlighted in it. I have designed a service design package where, you know, I've had the navigational categories, for example, actually highlighted in there for the client to see before we even do any engineering work on it. And Meghna can probably tell you a bit more about that, because she's had hands-on, you know, DevOps experience, and she's done that kind of technical work. But I've had the privileges of working with engineers and Scrum Masters in terms of getting that to you know, a refined stage. So the only one thing that I just want to highlight on is that's not actually on the slides, is the requirements. Well, I think the first slide actually went into the requirements. I'll just go back, and then we had yeah. So this slide kind of shows the business requirements. That ultimately is the business goal, and what is kind of acceptable. The service design actual function is something that would manage operational SLMs. And again, if you look at the box midway at the bottom, service design topology would come into that. Readiness, you get to readiness almost to the end. It covers functional management and operational SLMs. And then we get to the actual, when we get to operations, that's when the business is financially prepared to come on, let's take this on kind of thing. So I use the analogy of a rugby player. We have, when we get to operations, it's almost like we're going to catch the rugby ball and our eyes are up and our hands are out. Here it comes. Here's a service that's been designed, and you know, its underlying function in my eyes is a service design package that steers it to early life support before it even gets to service introduction. So that's basically on how to create a service design package, but I'm sure there's a lot more I could have covered in this session. Yeah, I'm open to questions, Ali. I hope the sound was fine.
The sound was fine for me. Apologies if for some of you it wasn't. A few questions have come in, so thank you for that, Surinder. Those are good points. And I'm finding from the chat that, you know, some people have more experience with service design packages, have used them, have created them, etc. And perhaps for some, it's a new concept. So understanding that the service design package is essentially at the heart, or should be at the heart, of any new service or an amendment to a new service, I think is great. But we'll explore this in a bit more detail to see what the questions that people have asked, and we'll obviously have time for some dialogue as well. Let me just see, there's a few things coming in the chat, but let me just start off with asking a few, okay? So one question which was sent to me in private was, how to best get the business to really believe in the benefits of having well-defined service design packages. So this question was related to someone who themselves believes in service design packages, but how do you get stakeholders in the organization to give you the time to ensure that it's seen as mandatory? What's your experience there?
Yeah, that's really important, and it's a good question. I'm glad that question came up, because when I was on my last gig, I was leading the service design area, so I had a lot of hands-on experience and a lot of responsibility in how to do this. And I'm a big communicator, so as I was saying to Alim and Meghna earlier on, I think as well as talking, I think listening is a big skill. My experience of that, Alim, has to be that, you know, getting people in a room is really easy way to do that, and doing a workshop, getting them to understand what is actually going to be delivered on the back of that service design package is possibly the way to go about it, because I've done that, and I've done it so many times with my multi-vendor approach that it was becoming something that was a bit of a success story in terms of how I was delivering. You have to be assertive when you do that. most definitely, because you have to have the belief that it's going to work in a way which you're going to channel. So you have to, you know, it's almost like having a you know, a propaganda to get the service design package done and off the floor in the best possible way, but having the communication with everyone, buy-in is the big thing. Getting everyone to buy into your dream or your idea is always a challenge, right? But there's ways to do that. And again, comms is very important. So to me, I think, as well as listening to these people within the room, you know, my colleagues, stakeholder, vendor, senior stakeholders from the client side, it was challenging because everyone has their 2 pence when you're having these conversations. But listening and then going back as the lead and taking the lead in order to deliver, sometimes it's difficult to get all parties to agree and deliver to all those parties. But it's important that you know that you're going to get this over the line, and it's, you know, to the best of your ability, and it covers more or less what ITIL kind of demonstrates. So that's the way I've done it. For about 12 services I transitioned in my last job. So yeah, definitely having those conversations and face to face in a room is important.
Thank you. So look, there may be more dialogue around this, because I think it's a great question, as was mentioned, and it's an area that actually is perhaps one of the biggest challenges to creating the service design package, to buy-in from all different areas. So we'll maybe come back to it, but let me just go and raise some more questions that people have asked. So next question, in terms of teaching people about SDP aspects, how important is it to stick with common ITIL terminology? And if it is, should everyone be trained in ITIL Foundation, for example? So what's your view there, Surinder and Meghana, in terms of the terminology in SDP and how ITIL aligned it should be?
Meghana, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
Yeah. So so basically on the ITIL terms, this is one of the area which comes in after the strategy, like Surinder mentioned. So the design is nothing but actually one of the person who mentioned as the low-level design or high-level design things. So this is something related from a service perspective and not from an architectural perspective, which is at a high level. But this is at a service perspective, which tells what's the exact business requirement, what's the impact of not having this in place, what's the service level requirements, and all of those things that gets into the detail which the operation team exactly would need when they deliver their or manage their show or the BAU. So so basically the service design gets tied up into the transition. So the transition is the one who executes the design and then ensures that it is handed over to the operations after the early life support. So basically they all are kind of interrelated, and it's like, I would say, the compartments of a train where, you know, it just passes from one compartment to another with the flow.
Thanks, Meghana. And if I could just add to that from my perspective then, so a lot of the terms that Meghana used there, for example, were plain English, right? So it gets passed from, and she even used trains as an example, right? So it gets passed from one carriage to another, and you're essentially moving from transition to operations, etc. And so, and my experience is, you don't have to use a lot of ITIL terminology in the service design package unless that service that you're designing has to be ITIL aligned. And it might do, right? So you might be an external service provider providing a service to a client, and it's all around ITIL, and they want change management mentioned, and problem management, and configuration management, and some of the other ITIL terms. And then you would have to have the ITIL terminology in the service design package. But if it doesn't have to be 99% ITIL aligned or whatever percentage, then actually plain English, you know, just common sense words are best in my experience. Okay, but let me move.
Terminology gives you that consistent language that have moved across the piece, and then everybody understands what they're talking about if you use that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, can't disagree with that. So, Surinder, go on.
Sorry, I'm talking over you, Ali.
It's all right. No, carry on, Surinder.
Yeah, so I think it's entirely dependent on what the business operates as. I've been in businesses where, as a consultant, where they've completely shied away from using ITIL terminology, though I have to say and admit that I'm one for using ITIL terminology. Because two things. One is that we get those ones that have not got the ITIL knowledge or background to kind of, you know, hear this is what it does, and they want to learn more about it. So it's kind of getting them onboarded onto ITIL for a start. Secondly, I think it's important that working, you know, in an ITIL environment, we use those terms and we familiarize ourselves with those terms, because 9 times out of 10, it's always going to be ITIL environment. So I think it's just best practice to do that.
Yeah, I think, and what I have seen in my experience is, if you do not say that this is ITIL term, and client may also say that, okay, they are following something ITIL, but honestly speaking, when you get into the understanding of what their terminology is and the meaning behind it, like Debbie mentioned, it's to ensure that we all are on the same page, because they might consider incident as something else or problem as, you know, something else, not by the ITIL definitions, right? So
yeah,
it's better to follow some pieces of ITIL, you know, to be on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And but just one last point on this, I guess. Look, completely agree, right? So Debbie's point, absolutely valid, and it's backed up. But in my experience, you might also use a service design package for non-IT services. So I was thinking about that sense. And then if it's for a non-IT department or non-IT service, then the concept of a service design package for a project, for a delivery, still hands true. And therefore using ITIL terminology as such may not be relevant, but I completely agree. Whatever language is used, ITIL, plain English, common sense, whatever, ideally it should be consistent in all of the delivery in that organization, right? And ideally, yes, ITIL, you know, absolutely. I'm a big advocate of ITIL, as most of you know. But let me move us on. Let me move us on to another question, but good discussion. So one person's asked, would it be possible to get a template of the SDP? So we don't have to answer that now. We can ensure that we send that afterwards to the attendees. So let me just move on. Another question that I'm coming on to now is, how much of the SDP will or has changed in ITIL v4 with respect to value streams? So I can cover this if need be, but let me only do that if Surinder, Meghana, because I don't know if you've done ITIL 4 or not. So in terms of your ITIL 4 experience, how much exposure do you have then? Do you know how relevant the SDP is?
Yeah, I mean, Alim, I'd like you to answer this one, because I know you're doing a session with the transition later on in the week. I think it's tomorrow.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So
okay.
I'm happy for you to answer that one.
Okay, all right. So, and actually, it's a great question, because I'm going to probably use this part of what I'm saying in this question to add it to the presentation that I'm delivering, as you said, Surinder, tomorrow, which is what's changed between ITIL v3 and v4. Okay, and I'll, like I said, I'll talk about the SDP as well then. To answer the question now, though, at the heart of it, the SDP still stands. Okay, so having a service design package is as relevant in ITIL v4 as it is in v3. What's really changed, and the question was around the value system, the value chain, some of these terminologies that may be familiar to some of you who've done ITIL v4, is essentially the co-creation of value now involving all of the partners. So previously in ITIL v3, it was when you were looking to create a service, it was traditionally seen as you know, the customer, the users, and you would create the service and you'd focus a bit on value. And in ITIL v4, they're essentially seeing that in this day and age, you're actually co-creating a service and co-creating value with a whole variety of different parties, including, in a lot of times now, external parties, right? So whether you're using Zoom to deliver some service, or whether you're using partners like Cisco or whomever, you're involved in with so many different stakeholders to deliver value. And the service design package now is therefore even more important, I would say, in ITIL v4 than ever before, because ensuring that everyone understands what the service is meant to look like is so key, right? Because if you just understand it internally, you just distribute it internally, then how are your suppliers or whoever it might be adding their value to the service that's being delivered? Now, my final point on that is, it's not that that wouldn't have happened in ITIL v3. It would have done. So anyone using ITIL v3, of course, should have done the service design package with all of the variety of stakeholders as well. It's just that in ITIL v4, they state it as something that, of course, you should be doing. You have to do. Whereas in ITIL v3, you had to use your own common sense to know that that's, you know, what you had to do. Right. So I hope I answered the question in that sense. So yeah, just as relevant in ITIL v4, if not more so. Any follow-up questions around that or subsequent discussion points anyone wants to kind of delve into before I move on to the next question? Okay, let me move us on then. To what extent does the current ITIL SDP approach supersede the more traditional service architecture approach, as in TOGAF, FEAF, and MODAF framework, MODAF? So I'm personally not too familiar with FEAF and MODAF, but I am with TOGAF. So Megano, Surinder, are you able to answer this one in terms of ITIL SDP in comparison to, say, TOGAF or FEAF or MODAF? And again, I have a view, but do you know much about this area? Can you answer it?
I'm going to let you answer that one, Alim. But I have had some exposure to MODAF, TOGAF, but it's not much. I don't think, I'm not going to say too much about it because I don't want to kind of steer the actual answer here, but it's not something that I have done too much of, and it's not something that I particularly advocate myself. So I'll let Alim answer that one.
Okay, yeah, and I'm happy to. So I haven't certified in TOGAF, but I have worked in and with a lot of TOGAF people and architects, TOGAF architects, people who've certified in TOGAF. And in my experience, what I found is that from a TOGAF perspective, the architects like to get into more technical detail. They do the vision, they do the high level, but there's far more component technical detail that goes into the TOGAF architecture and the blueprint, the design that they do from that perspective. Whereas in my experience from an SDP perspective, it's one layer higher. So you still need the TOGAF architecture, you still need the architecture, whether it's TOGAF, MODAF, or whatever, but the SDP is normally more at the business level or the high level. So it would be a combination of both that you may need. Okay, or of course, depending on the organization, whether you're using TOGAF, whether you've got technical people designing the SDP, of course, it could be one document. It could just be the service design package with annexes into the service architecture. Or, as I said, two different documents, one from an architectural technical perspective and one from a business design perspective. So
the only one thing I just want to add to that comes to mind is I did a piece on auto-provisioning for my last contract, and basically that went into, you know, TOGAF to the nth degree. I mean, it's fantastic to get an overall understanding of what's going on, and you know, you could potentially use it for everything, but in terms of auto-provisioning, it was something that I actually needed in order for, you know, for me to even understand what was going on in terms of how the IT infrastructure was set up and how the architecture was going to look like. Once, you know, I delivered the auto-provisioning service for the service catalog, that's where one example sticks to my mind.
Yeah. Okay, and then just more questions are coming in. So let me I'm just grabbing those. Actually, look, rather than, so I do have more questions, right? So I do have more questions that I will raise, but let's also just stop at this point to see if there are questions that people want to raise verbally or discussion points that they would like to have. Now, remember, you're on mute, so please unmute yourself if you need to. But any question or dialogue that you want to have based on what you've heard so far?
think I agree with the Surinder's initial discussion when she was saying you need to be assertive, because you need to make your SMEs understand how important this document is. So how I dealt with it was by setting up a kick-off meeting, getting all the SMEs on board. But that's after the service architect or has actually talked to them anyway, and make sure everybody understands the same, make sure they've all got a copy of the SDP, but also is go back and make sure that they've actually read it and understand it as part of my operational acceptance criteria. Because it's all right producing these documents, but if nobody ever looks at it, it's a bit useless, really, isn't it? And then I think the other side as well is helping the customer understand what they're buying, and the end users, because you've got your SLAs that you've agreed with your customer to say this is the availability we've agreed, or the capacity or whatever, and your end users don't know that. They sometimes just say, well, things are taking a couple of days, don't understand that that's what the company's paying for. And if they want things to turn around in 2 hours, the company needs to pay for a more in-depth service, which is more expensive. So I think it's a really important document, and I know all the projects I've been worked on, we've had them in place, and they are a really valuable document.
Yeah. Thanks, Debbie. Anyone else?
I just want to add to Debbie's point, Alan, just quickly. I totally understand and totally agree with what Debbie just said. That it's also important to understand behaviors as well within an organization, and that's something that I advocate. My background isn't actually in IT. I come from finance, investment banking, but to understand behaviors when I came into IT was very difficult. But I found that it was a winner for every game. So to understand how people work and how they want a service to work is so important. And I emphasize the point of empathy and listening to what the customer wants, so that you don't get the ball kicked back over to you, or it goes back and forth, which is extra admin in my eyes. And I've mitigated that every time in terms of service design. So I think that's really important.
Agreed. So look, let me go back to the questions that came through the chat then, and we'll maybe have time for discussion as well in a second. So another question that had come in, which is similar to the one that we've already covered. So I'll just raise it, but say that we covered it already. The question was, how is the SDP different from a low-level design document? And we covered that already in that low-level design TOGA. They could be the layer below an SDP, so you need that. And think of the SDP more as a high-level design document, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? So as I mentioned, SDP could be both the low-level and high-level design, but that's just kind of one answer to that question, which we covered already. A great question here, which I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer or not. I don't have the answer for it. I haven't used it. But the question is around, are there any tools to automate the SDP rather than using the template, rather than using a Word document, an Excel document, any tools that people have experience of? And I personally don't, but it's a great question. So I wonder if anyone else on the call has experience of using a tool to automate the SDP development, communication, deployment, etc. Anyone?
Give anyone a chance to say anything in terms of tools, but I'll just add to that if no one wants to add anything.
Yeah, no, go on, Surinder, if you need to, but and I'll let others come in afterwards. But yeah, so any experience with tools, Surinder, around this SDP? So
the first thing is, I'm all up for automation and tools. It's a fantastic way of doing things. I've worked with people who have created tools as well, but something that I really advocate highly, and it's something that it's my personal style of working, is I wouldn't really want a tool to do anything for me at this point in time with regards to a service design package, because the only reason I say that is because I've had a lot of kind of, you know, diagrams, workflows put into which can be done by a tool. I'm not at all saying they can't, but I actually came into IT without any qualifications, and I just got thrown in the deep end, and I got promoted to service designer within 6 months. And hey, you know what? It was working for me, but having, you know, sight of what's going on, it was almost like it was a learning experience for me as well, because I understood how, you know, how the workflows were going to pan out and how they were going to work. So in a way, I'm all up for automation, but in terms of service design packages, I know businesses that do, especially in the finance area where I have not actually worked. And honestly speaking, my clients have always been, you know, central government departments who are, you know, they're not very keen on change and innovation and all the rest of it, whereas banks and finance I know are. So that's where service design package tools, automation tools might be used or utilized, but in my area of work it hasn't, and it's kind of helped me learn a bit more because I haven't had this tool do anything for me. You know, I've been the tool. So it's entirely kind of subjective, the whole matter, but to answer the question, no, but I do know they exist, and I'm sure I could get some more information on it need be.
And English has posted a tool called qualitor.com in the chat, which may be relevant and good, right? So you can all check that out. But yeah, I personally haven't used the tool. For me, having the document, and the document, by the way, could be PowerPoint. So I didn't mention PowerPoint, because remember, I think the main aim of a service design package is getting down the requirements and communicating them and ensuring that everyone is on the same page, right? That's the key. So however you can achieve that, that's the best result. Now, whether you can do that through a tool, I don't know, but I guess PowerPoint in some respects is a tool anyway. But thank you, English. So let me go on to another question, if I may. The question is, I think another good question, do we still need an SDP if we are just simply upgrading, updating an environment and not introducing a new service? So Surinder and Meghana, what's your view around upgrading, updating an existing service and what you do with this service design package there?
Yeah, so I wouldn't actually create a new service design package for it, but because we have control and change management on a service design package, we would just up version it, and that's all I've done. It's that simple, because you want to, you want to mitigate the kind of admin on it as well, right? And from an ITIL you know, best practice view, I've always just, you know, up versioned from whatever I've been on, in terms of, you know, if it's an upgrade, not necessarily a new service. However, if it is a new service, then, you know, 100% new service design package for it, new template, no ifs and buts about that. But if you're, you know, just upgrading anything, then up version the document is what I would suggest.
Yeah, I totally agree with Surinder, because the change management process should completely take care of upgrading or updating the environment if there's no new service that's being introduced. So that should be good enough.
Yep. Thank you both. A question which has come out as a result of the discussion that we're having, which I think is a great question, is who is the key audience for an SDP? So great question. And actually, again, you know, I'll point to Surinder and Meghana, but this might be relevant to many of you in terms of where you've used it and who your audience has been. But Surinder, if you want to go first, please, in terms of how you've used it, or I'll open it up to others as well.
Yeah, sure. So my experience has been primarily, so I've worked in silent transition, so I haven't actually worked in a business where it's just been myself and the client. It's always been, you know, every person that we can find. So when you've got a multi-vendor approach to it, and I'm going to use one example which I shared with Meghna this morning, is so for, I don't know, use managed print service as a simple example here. I had Vodafone delivering the port, and I had Xerox, for example, doing, I'm just using this as an example, by the way, doing the actual managed print or delivering the managed print service. So I've got in the room myself as a service designer or service design lead. I've then got my counterpart within the client side, and then I've got my counterparts that are sat within Vodafone and Xerox respectively to kind of review the service design package. The service design package has never been a document which has been like, I've done this, here you go, have a read of it, and that's it. It's been refined many times before we actually get to the end stage, at which point, you know, this is just before perhaps testing, for example. I'm going to use that as an example here because that's how it's worked for me. In the room, I'm not saying that it's, you know, that's a definitive list of who should be in there, but I'm all for transparency as well. So in my case, I've brought a complete audience along and got some of operations involved as well to say, look guys, this is what you're going to get thrown over the fence in 6 months time. How do you like it? You know, it's more about engagement and communication, and it goes back to my point about behavior and having people have the buy-in, because the more you expose the design package to the audience, in this case, you know, the people I've mentioned and operations within your own business, the more buy-in you will get when the service eventually goes through those train carriages to ops. So it's important that you choose your audience wisely, and it's entirely up to you as to who goes in there. But that's what I've done every time I've done any service design package for any service.
And others, so I'm happy to open this up to anyone. You know, you'll have to unmute yourself, but where you've used the service design package and examples of your audiences, your stakeholders.
I just got one example for me was on one account, there was often external suppliers, and although they were ITIL based as well, this is a way of aligning all the processes. So, you know, my company might have had this is the way we work, this is how we do it. The other company may be similar, but then there'll be gaps. So I had sessions where I'd get the right SMEs together to say, well, what are the differences between the two approaches, and how do we come up with a way of working together on those? And mostly, to be fair, it was driven by you need to adopt our process, but I think your service design package can help in that as well.
Yes.
To help alignment.
Yeah, processes is an important part Debbie's just touched on as well, because as I was saying to Alim before we even started the session today, having had exposure to processes and being a process leader in some of my career as well, I think that really helped me steer how I deliver my service design package, even, you know, before kickoff, and say, look guys, this is how it is. In my head, I always knew what the process would entail, but having those guys in a room and kind of getting them to understand, or even listening to what, you know, their process entails. The Xerox and the Vodafone example is a good one, because they had to align their processes to deliver the managed print service, for example. So that's really important.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question, which is a really good question, just purely because of time. Otherwise, we could have explored that in more detail as well. And the question is, when should an SDP get involved in an environment where they're using parallel frameworks, multiple frameworks, not just ITIL? So they're using maybe COBIT, TOGA, Waterfall, you know, whatever it might be. How do you get that SDP involved in that environment? How do you, I guess, establish it, and at what point do you use it? So Megan or Surinder, I'm happy for either of you to take that from your experience, different environments when you use an SDP.
Meghna, do you want to take that, or shall I take that one?
You can take that on, Surinder.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, actually. So I'm going to go back to my original point of the auto-provisioning, where TOGAF was a big thing, and it was the only place that I actually did use TOGAF. So for using, you know, for utilizing the service architecture, or the IT infrastructure as part of a service design package, I found that I had to engage the engineers or the developers very early on in terms of how I was going to push out the service. Therefore, that service design package, and I remember vividly because we had so many issues with it, teething problems, I'd say, because it was the only one where TOGA was actually utilized. To get an understanding, again, goes back to behavior. For everyone to get on the same page, it was important that that SCP covered, as part of the appendix, that whole IT architecture or service architecture piece in there for anyone to understand how auto-provisioning was going to work, because let's face it, auto-provisioning does not involve a person, right? So here, this was something new to the client and they were not understanding it at all. So for me to get them onboarded, to even, you know, the minor gritty details to begin with was quite challenging, and I had to really kind of get that service design package off the floor before we even tested any kind of functionality, or, you know, it had an idea of how we were going to test. And I can remember there was about 25 people in that room, and it was quite daunting for me to do, you know, to do my service design package briefing in there to say, look guys, this is how the IT infrastructure works. However, having said that, use another service, telephony, voice. That came very further down the line. We'd even had tests set up, and our service design package dictated what was in the test environment, because the client had come to us and said, we just want to transition from our legacy system onto ServiceNow, but not have anything changed. So it was quite easy. So I think personally for me, it's always been dependent on what the client has asked for. But me using my logic, I've understood where a service design package needs to be pushed out. So it's entirely dependent, I think, personal experience as to where the client is at in terms of knowledge and understanding of where and how the service is going to actually function as a service in operations, or what they, you know, they're asking us to do, or what they would like us to do. And it's bespoke, I would say. 100%. It depends on what it is as to where it goes out. There's not one kind of rule for it all, and not one size fits all, unfortunately, but it's good because I think that's the way you kind of learn a bit more about how to develop.
Yeah. Thanks, Surinder. And look, now I'm about to post 3 questions in the chat, which I'm going to try and paraphrase and get answered together. So they came in, I don't want to miss anyone out, but essentially the way I'll ask this question is, because I think they're related. So in terms of using the STP to transition from, whether it's, you know, DevOps, from transition to operations, how it's used, and in particular, the capability. So you'll see these questions kind of just the capability and capacity of the different teams to be involved, to not only be involved in developing the SDP or contributing to it, but then also meeting the SLAs that are defined in the SDP. So, you know, how do you bring that together, working with the different teams to ensure their involvement and their agreement with the SLAs, and that they can actually deliver them? And then in combined with that, so how would you define what a good SDP looks like? What's the success factors for an SDP, especially when you're involving all these different parties? So if you could, I know it's a bit of a challenging one, Surinder, but if you can kind of try and answer that group of questions as one, please. So how do you get different people involved? How do you get them to commit and deliver their SLAs? And what's the success factor for the SDP itself when you're working with all these teams?
Yeah, sorry, I was just making a note of that in that order. Yeah, so how do you get different people kind of onboarded onto it? I think it goes back to my earlier point of how, you know, getting people to, they may not be ITIL literate. That's one thing. And I've worked with many people, and I hold nothing against those people, because it's learning, right? We're all here to learn, and we teach each other all sorts, and we need to learn. So for me, it was always about, if I'm presenting something to someone who's already got ITIL experience and knowledge, I want to present that to some, you know, service desk analyst, for example, who are not, you know, don't have the service design qualification because they don't need it, to get them to understand what is actually going on. It's a challenge because, let's face it, IT is a profession where, you know, we've got subject matter experts. I'm a catalog expert, I would say. I don't have much of a clue about how, I don't know, developing works. I do have a bit, but not a lot. So to understand, you know, where people's remit is, and to understand that not everybody knows, you know, the service design speak, is very important. That in itself is a challenge when, again, going back to who do we engage when we actually want to deliver a service design package. For me, it was understanding, like, you know, in operations we've got and we need to get these guys onboarded in the transition environment, and to get them to understand that this is what we're going to deliver to you in order for us to even have success. So success factors are important, and I see success even before I begin at where I've got my business requirements, because that is a business goal, right? And it's a goal that we collectively share as a team, as a business. Therefore, to get to that, I need to involve operations, and I'm all for sharing, communicating, being transparent, and operating with integrity to get to that point. So that answers the question, I hope, about the people. And then, sorry, what was the second one about how?
So just to finish up then, so what makes a good SDP? What's the success factor for an SDP?
Yeah, so I would say the success factor, there are many actually, but I'm going to highlight on maybe 3. One is getting the buy-in from your team in operations, because that has been my major challenge. Not so much the actual counterparts that have sat on the other side of the business have not been as challenging, but to get operations onboarded has been a challenge. So to get people who, you know, and not hold it against them in a way, but you know that are not going to buy the idea very well in terms of how you're designing a service, is to get the buy-in and have that engagement with them and get them to understand, or, you know, share their knowledge of what's going on in operations, so you can actually design something which is going to be, you know, amazing when it gets to transition, when it gets to operations from transition, is one. Secondly, I think, again, goes back to my earlier point of behavior and empathy. We've got to understand as a service designer, when creating a service design package, is what does a user actually want, and how is a user going to be happy? There's been multiple times when I've gone onto a website and I've been absolutely upset by the way it's not working, and that's just an example I can share with everyone on this call today, because, you know, it's something that we do all the time, and someone's like, this is such a rubbish website or page or form or whatever. You don't want that, right? So you listen and you try to mitigate that whole rubbish scenario, and that's the second one. Thirdly, take on board everything that everyone is saying. Just be a sponge and soak it up. But as a service designer or a lead or a package maker, whatever you are, take the lead, be assertive, as I said earlier, and do what you deem is good for the user. And empathy, again, is what I utilize to get to that end point. So these, you know, are not even ITIL things. These are like more like traits that you can employ in a service design arena to get to, you know, ultimate success in my eyes, because it's such a fulfilling role that I have, and I thoroughly enjoy what I do. So those are my kind of 3 snippets on what I think are important for a service design package to be successful.
Okay, thank you. And there are a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but unfortunately we've run out of time. We will answer all of these questions more formally, including any we missed, and submit them back to you along with the presentation and the video recording. So let me just take the time now to say a big thank you to Surinder and Meghana and all of you for your time. And we will see you on future sessions. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.